We begin the news at this hour in West Africa, where Nigeria's Supreme Court has reserved judgment in the appeals by the People's Democratic Party and the All Progressives Congress against the election of Abia State Governor Alex Otti. The five-man panel led by John Okoro adjourned the matters for judgment after taking arguments from parties involved. The Court of Appeal sitting in Lagos had dismissed the petitions by the People's Democratic Party and its candidate Oke Ahiwe and Ikechi Emenike of the APC. The APC and PDP are asking the Apex Court to nullify the election of Otti of the Labour Party. Meanwhile, the Nigerian government, through the Federal Ministry of Education, has set up a committee to look into the activities of private universities established in the last 15 years in the country. Minister of Education, Professor Tahir Mamman, made the disclosure on Tuesday during the inauguration of the Inter-Ministerial Committee on Degree Mills in the country. He noted that the essence of the directive is to ensure that the private institutions under investigation have the prescribed facilities, adequate management structure, and adequate funding of programs, among others, in place. The minister added that the Inter-Ministerial Committee set up to look into the activities of illegal universities will also examine the veracity of the allegations of degree certificate racketeering within both foreign and local private universities in Nigeria. To further discuss this, I'm now being joined by Dr. Jide Johnson, a lecturer and public affairs commentator. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for coming to our studios.
It's a pleasure to be with you, and good day to our viewers all over the world. Thank you for having me.
Now, the National Universities Commission has been saddled with the responsibility of promoting quality higher education learning in Nigeria. How would you rate their performance in the last 15 years?
Well, we can only do that rating if you look at what has been the global rating index for Nigerian universities compared to what we have prior to that particular point in time. When you look at it from the perspective of the number of institutions that have gotten approval to mount different types of programs, you see we have made tremendous progress to what it used to be. But if you look at in terms of the quality of the graduates that have been churned out and compliance with the rules and regulations governing the operation and management of educational institutions, particularly tertiary institutions, are there rooms for improvement? Yes, of course, both at the private level and at the public level, there are rooms for improvement that calls for regular intervention by agencies charged with that particular responsibility, which is the National University Commission. And for me, not the Ministry of Education, because the body that is actually charged for the regulation of tertiary education, particularly at the university level, is National University Commission. At the polytechnic level is National Board for Technical Education. These are bodies empowered by the constitutions and enabling law governing that particular sector in Nigeria to do that. And if that is done, I can assure you, if they are compliant with what is required of them in terms of regulatory standard that they are meant to uphold, I can assure you that we don't have any problem with the issue of certificate racketeering. We wouldn't have any problem with the quality of programs and compliance with what is required in terms of carrying capacity. Because if you look at all of this, how many students, what's the student to lecturer ratio, what are the equipments that are required, what are the infrastructural facilities that are required, and what types of remuneration and welfare packages do you have for the staff that are working in this institution in order to deliver excellent services for the students that have applied to various programs in those institutions.
Well, if you look at it, Doctor, this is not the first time such directive has been given by government. So at this time, do you see anything positive coming out of the exercise, most especially at this time that directive has gone out from the federal government?
My challenge with this present administration, is that this administration seems to want to address all Nigerian problems at the same time, and they tend to adopt a knee-jerk approach, to solving the problem. Look at this issue of certificate racketeering. I'm sure is in response to what happened with respect to that investigation carried out by that journalist, getting a degree from a neighboring country university and being able to be mobilized not only once but twice for NYSC program. I think that what the Federal Ministry of Education should have done is to have required the bodies that have been established to do what they are supposed to do. We shouldn't even give publicity to all of this. If you have NUC and NUC is functioning according to the mandate which is given to you, don't even need a special. Someone said if you don't want to get anything done, call for a meeting. If you want to waste people's time, set up a committee. And how many committees have we had to address problems in Nigeria that we have seen the end product of that committee? The committee for that of what happened with the certificate from neighboring countries and other schools that are not duly recognized by Federal Ministry of Education as to institutions outside of Nigeria that can award degree that they've certified that their degrees can be accepted. We've not even seen that, and then they are coming up with this again. And then look, it's good to have an internal investigation, no doubt about that. But I think that the National University Commission is given that responsibility. If there are DEX officers that are not performing, those DEX officers should be sanctioned.
Earlier on, you talked about the ratio of students to lecturer. You talked about infrastructural deficits in tertiary institutions. And we know that year in, year out, the government keeps allocating a certain percentage to the education sector. But then we've not seen that translating into anything meaningful in terms of positive development in that particular sector. But some other people have still come out to say that it goes beyond just funding. And like you've also mentioned, you've talked about increasing the regulatory roles of the agencies or bodies that have been given the mandate to look at issues affecting the sector and seeing how they can change the narrative. Now, what are the things that are needed to be done aside regulatory functions, funding, that could make the education system in Nigeria robust and would ensure or help encourage Nigerians to not want to travel abroad, but then want to stay here to acquire education?
Well, John Maxwell said everything rises and falls on leadership. It starts from the leadership of these regulatory bodies, who are those that are appointed into. You see, until we do away with politicization of appointment into sensitive sector. Sensitive sector, one of the most sensitive sector that is the cornerstone and the foundation of any development of any nation is the educational sector. So who are those? Now, for example, you look at what the present JAMB registrar was able to do by virtue of being given that responsibility of managing JAMB. We knew what challenges JAMB faced prior to his assuming the leadership, and nobody could ever thought that JAMB could have such a major turnaround. And that also talks about the leadership of NUC, the leadership of NBT, the leadership of all these regulatory body. How do we set up the management team? How do we set up the people that are in charge of the affairs of these various bodies? Are we doing it based on political expediencies, or we are doing it on the basis of competencies? How do you appoint the headship and leadership of the heads of various institutions, the vice chancellors? Now it has gotten so bad that the appointment of vice chancellor has become so politicized that even from within the same state, people will still narrow it down, play their identity to the point of clannish level, that okay, it's the turn of our clan, it's not even the turn of our tribe. And educational institutions are not meant to be run like that. They are meant to be run based on meritocracy. So I think that we need to depoliticize the various appointment in terms of leadership of various educational institutions that we have. And I tell you, once we do that, in the past, you don't have to come either from a geopolitical zone to be the VC in that. And Njoku was VC Unilag. And Njoku is from the east, and Unilag is in Lagos. We've seen VCs from that, but all of those things are not practically possible now these days. It has become highly politicized that even if you are not from that particular state in a federal institution, you cannot even be the VC of that particular federal institution. We need to do away with all of that and allow meritocracy, which is the hallmark of educational system.
Now going back to the issue of the investigation called for by the government, should any of these private institutions be found wanting, what impact will it have on Nigerian graduates who obtain degrees from these universities and those who are still undergoing studies in them?
Well, I think that what should be done should not be limited to the private institutions, should be extended to all institutions, both public and private, because it should be an holistic approach. However, any student that is that found him or herself running an unaccredited program, for example, what are the ways in which those students' future could be better handled? I think that probably they should ask those students to reapply for different programs that are accredited in those particular institutions, so that their life and their future is not wasted. And any school that is found culpable of not complying with the rules and regulations governing the operations of these various institutions, such programs should be removed from the programs that the school can run, and such schools should be fined heavily, so that it will serve as a deterrent for others in not committing such heinous crime in the future. Because those students, most of the students that have applied to those programs that are not accredited, quote unquote now, because until the end of the investigation we might not even know what is really going in those institutions, might be taken advantage of because of their desperation, just like the Nigerian student that went to other countries to do programs that are not accredited or recognized by the Federal Ministry of Education. So what do? We should hold the schools culpable, and sanctions should be applied where and when necessary.
Yes, some other people have actually said that it should not only, the investigation should not only encompass tertiary institutions in Africa, talking about other African countries, that it should also be extended to institutions abroad, overseas, because of course we had such issue with the current president. Of course, the issue about the Chicago University, of course, that particular issue was a major talk point in Nigeria as regards the veracity or the authenticity of his educational degree that was tendered at that point. So without having to cast aspersion on anyone, should it just be within Africa as it is, or we should expand the scope to other, as long as it's not in Nigeria, whether overseas or in other African countries, these institutions or these universities should be looked into. The degrees should be verified before these people are either admitted into Nigeria's educational system or be employed into Nigeria's labor force. What do you think?
Well, I think there should be a department within the Federal Ministry of Education that has to do with the evaluation of certificates that are brought from other institutions into Nigeria. For example, if you apply to United States of America or Canada, there is WES. WES will require you to send your transcript, and they will evaluate your program based on that. And I'm sure the Ministry of Education will have that, and they will have a list of schools that they recognize. But you know what? The challenge with us in Africa is that we believe that anything that is foreign is genuine, and it's not everything. It's not anything that is foreign that is genuine. They are counterfeit American dollar, they are counterfeit European, British pounds, they are counterfeit euro. So the word counterfeit is not even an African word; it's an English word. So it shows, it portrays the fact that what does not exist in your environment does not exist in your language. Your language is a reflection of what exists in your society. So, as far as I'm concerned, it should be extended beyond the shores of Nigeria. We have had cases with people that have been elected into exalted offices in Nigeria, having questionable mark on the certificate they presented. You recall in 1999, at the beginning of this present Fourth Republic, the speaker, one of the youngest speakers that was elected, lied about his age, even lied about his qualification. You remember the Toronto saga of Salisu Buhari in 1999, and then you talk about Evans Ewerem too with respect to the certificate which he presented, and the recent one concerning the veracity of actually where does the certificate of the president come from? Is it from Chicago State University, or is it from the University of Chicago? And all of those clouds surrounding that should be cleared. And their bodies, my challenge is that we have so many agencies in Nigeria. These agencies are funded by the public through the taxpayers' money. These agencies live up to their responsibility. We wouldn't be having these challenges that we are having with respect to fake certification, mounting of on unaccredited unaccredited programs, schools admitting students more than their carrying capacity, and schools not providing the needed equipment required to train the students.
Well, that actually quickly calls to mind the ex-finance minister, Kemi Adeosun, that was actually accused of forging NYSC certificate. At that time, it was a big issue, and we hope that that would not occur. Even as you have said, a lot of things need to be done to deal with issues like that. Now, to wrap things up, the future of higher education in Nigeria is uncertain as we see it, but some say that current situation could be a blessing in disguise and could probably nudge the country towards the right direction. So as an educationist, what are your future hopes for the sector? You talked about the things that need to be done. Do you think that we have the mettle to see through?
I think what are the needs of our country? What are the manpower needs that we require beyond the certificate? I think the emphasis is too much on certificate in this country. We require skills and competencies. Emphasis on university education. We have forgotten about the technical and vocational schools. We have forgotten about the polytechnic. For example, in my state, in Lagos State transmuted Lagos State Polytechnic from being a polytechnic to University of Technology, and each of these institutions have their various roles to play. The polytechnic are meant to provide middle-level manpower. The technical schools are meant to provide low-level manpower. And emphasis is everybody wants to get university degrees. So what are our needs? I think that there is a need for us to have a national conversation with respect to what should be the structure of our educational system. What should be the structure of beyond certificate? Are there vocational education we'll focus on? Are there educations that will focus on the skills and competencies of people, and we can make right investment? How many lawyers are we going to need in the next 20 years? How many engineers are we going to need? How many welders? How many plumbers? How many various artisans? That will direct the way in which we invest in order to provide the needed manpower for our country. But if you need those artisans, if you need those middle level and low level skill, competence-based manpower, I tell you have to go to neighboring countries to get it. And if you continue on this present trajectory, I can assure you that you have a lot of graduates that are not employable. You have a lot of graduates that just have the certificate, but they can't justify the certificate which they carry. And that's the conversation we need to have as a country. What will be our needs, our manpower needs in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, and we structure our educational system around that, and that's where we invest. When you invest now, we take care of our future.
Dr. Jide Johnson, thank you so much for your insight on the news.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
You're watching News Central now. We'll go on a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Don't go away. Many thanks for staying with us. We tell you that Nigeria's Minister of Humanitarian Affairs has appeared before the nation's anti-graft agency, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. The minister, who has been suspended by President Bola Tinubu following allegations of diverting about 585 million naira, thereby breaching civil service rules. Some Nigerians who spoke to News Central Television in Abuja have commended the actions of government and called for an extension of the ongoing investigations to other agencies. Idong Joseph reports.
In the last few days, Nigeria's social media space has been flooded with reactions over the payment of about 585 million naira into a private account, in breach of laid-down fiscal rules by the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation. While the action contravenes Chapter 7, Section 713 of the Nation's Financial Regulation Act of 2009, I quote, "Personal money shall in no circumstances be paid into a government bank account, nor shall any public money be paid into a private bank account. An officer who pays public money into a private account is deemed to have done so with fraudulent intention." End of quote.
We have pointed out to Mr. President Buhari and Tinubu that some public officials are diverting public taxpayers' money into their own personal accounts in the name of project accounts. And we suggested to the government to block those leakages.
A letter was sent to the Accountant General Office that is ought to not has happened, because that is a program, that is a project. The project is self-accounted. All they needed to do is to do that, follow the procedures. And just so you know, it's illegal for that amount of money to be sent to a staff.
Despite claims by the minister that the payment had followed laid-down procedures with approval from the presidency and the Accountant General, which has been denied, The suspension of the minister by the president has also received public commendation.
If you allow her to stay there now, there's some certain fire that will be hiding. If he knows that you are going to public office for your personal interest, you should leave public office for somebody that can do well for the common masses. What this new government are doing is right.
To everyone that have intention to do such acts, it's not encouraging, but the suspension came immediately and is a very good one.
Advocates are also calling for the investigation to be extended to other government ministries and agencies, urging government not to interfere in the investigations.
This problem is not only in the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. It is a problem that you see in many government agencies because people don't respect the rules.
Around the scandal we're talking about, a minister pointed a paper, that's the Minister of Interior, saying he has resigned from a company 5 years ago, but the company is being awarded to monitor and stuff like that.
While the federal government has received rave reviews for its quick intervention in suspending the embattled minister, Nigerians are hoping that the investigations will be thorough and justice will not be swept under the carpet. In Abuja for News Central, I am Idong Joseph.
In the meantime, the integrity and honesty of Nigeria's public office holders have yet again been questioned following the recent allegations of graft against serving and past officials of the nation's humanitarian ministry. While there have been several suspensions and dismissals of public officials by President Bola Tinubu in the last few days, many Nigerians have described their conduct as an age-long rot in the nation's civil and public service. Marvelous Obomanu was on the streets of Abuja and sampled opinions of Nigerians.
Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has suspended a few public officers in his government for alleged embezzlement and misappropriation of public funds. The air around the suspensions, according to many, have yet again revealed the rot in the nation's civil and public service and the need for a tough stance against official graft. The ordinary Nigerian feels the presence of government, rates its performance through the activities of civil servants. Thus, the effectiveness or otherwise of the government to a large extent is determined by the civil service. Now, many Nigerians are saying that this institution has been enmeshed by corrupt and dishonest officers.
A lot is going on in Nigerian civil service. Ghost workers, pardon, a lot of things. Most of them are covered by those who should expose them.
As I speak to you right now, there are a lot of civil servants that are still in the employment of Nigeria that are outside the country doing whatever they want to do. Some of them went under the disguise of going there to study. They have found other greener pastures there and they will never come back again. And their salaries are still running in Nigeria.
There's a rot that is deep-rooted in that particular system, and everybody needs to go out, and then new people needs to come back in. But however, we know that that is impossible. So what do? We need to set in place stringent consequence measures. We need to ensure that the consequences for actions are meted out for the appropriate crimes, and nobody should be left behind.
Some of them bribe their way in. So what do you expect? They want to recover that money. So any available opportunity they will grab and start making use of.
Looking at the corruption ranking of Nigeria by Transparency International in 2022, which revealed that out of 189 countries sampled, Nigeria ranked 150 on the scale, a situation that asks questions on the efforts of past governments in changing the situation. Some have raised the issue of poor remuneration of civil servants, integrity of anti-corruption agencies, and a poor recording process of activities by public officials in the service.
A lot of people believe that if you steal plenty money, you get to them, you bribe your way out. That is why today, if somebody is arrested by EFCC, you don't give a damn. Is it not money? I'll say to them.
Most of these civil servants are making less than $100 every month, which can barely cater for their basic needs, because the government is actually not providing social amenities for us. We have to generate power on our own. We have to pay for our health system, our health on our own. We have to get water for ourselves. And these things need to change.
Most civil servants are not around in Nigeria. Their salaries are running. You understand? And by the time you see your neighbor not doing the right thing and nobody is reporting him or her, you want to join suit. So what I think the civil service should do is to take care of the record and monitor it very well. You understand? Once that records are monitored, you can be able to trace to your office, to your department, who is at work and who is not at work.
Nigerians have commended the quick response of the president as he suspended suspected officials, ordering the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission not to leave any stone unturned in its quest to get to the root of the matter. Many will be awaiting the outcome of the investigations. In Abuja for News Central, Marvelous Obomanu.
Well, we touch on more African stories, but it is pertinent we'll look at this Israel and Gaza war now. For the first time in its history, Israel will find itself in the dock in the International Court of Justice in The Hague, charged with genocide. Although the notion that Israel is committing genocide in the Gaza war, intentionally murdering Palestinian civilians, may appear ridiculous to some, the allegations seem to be extremely serious, and even an interim ruling against Israel could have a significant impact on Israel's international status and global reputation, with potentially dire diplomatic and political consequences. Critically, the numerous inflammatory statements made by Israeli government ministers against Palestinians in Gaza have provided South Africa with a platform to say that the state of Israel intends to commit genocide, which is a critical component of any genocide allegations. So at this point, Roland Marks, the spokesperson for SA Zionist Federation, joins us from Modin, Israel, for more on this. Roland Marks, it's nice to have you around.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
How would you describe the overall mood in Israel right now as the country prepares to defend itself against South Africa tomorrow at The Hague?
Well, first of all, I just want to address the allegations in your opening that there were comments made by certain lawmakers that South Africa have used in their motivation. If one puts a spotlight on South Africa, you would find that lawmakers in South Africa have also made comments that could be tantamount to calls for genocide. However, with Israel, it is not official government policy. Israel has no official government policy calling for the genocide of Palestinians. If anything, quite the opposite. So I think that's something very, very important to address off the bat. But to answer your question, how are Israelis dealing with this? Well, there is a sense of I would call it irritation and disbelief, because Israelis are still very, very deep in our grief. It has been just over 3 months, in fact, 95 days since the massacre committed by Hamas. Hamas were the genocidal Tartar who have stated again and again and again that their intention is to eradicate the state of Israel and to eliminate Jews around the world, committed the grossest atrocities on the Jewish people since the end of the Holocaust, murdering, raping, mutilating, torturing, and kidnapping. We are still very, very much in the process of mourning for our 1,300 victims, including women, children, the elderly, and babies. And we are very, very concerned about the 130 plus kidnapped hostages that still remain in the Gaza Strip. You can see I'm wearing my yellow ribbon. We never forget our hostages, the youngest being 1-year-old Kfir Bibas, the oldest being 85 years old. So to make these allegations of genocide against the state of Israel, who are doing what any country in the world would do, is defend its civilian population, including foreign nationals. We also can't forget the African victims of the Hamas atrocities, including Tanzanians Josh Molel and Clemence Matanga, who were also brutally murdered and taken by Hamas terrorists. Our war is not with the people of Gaza. Our war is with Hamas, an internationally recognized terror entity, and we cannot allow for a terrorist enclave to exist on our borders.
Paraphrasing now, Roline, you said that the directive, of course, this directive is detailed and deep, and it shows or means that you are following it to the letter. But then when you look at the casualties, is it as a result of what has happened to Israel? That is why the Zionists are now, the forces now, are now taking it deep down into Gaza, because the tag is a genocide is being committed. And when you look at the casualties, it's more on the side of the civilians, of the Palestinians, than the Hamas group that is being attacked. So what is the justification for this? Because if you're fighting against the rape and the attacks and the killings on Israeli, is it not the same thing that is being done by Israeli forces?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because first we have to define what genocide is. And genocide is a clear intention to eliminate a race or a group of people from the world, to eliminate them, just like was done to the Jewish people during the Holocaust. Now, Israel and Israel's defense forces are operating within the laws of armed conflict. We are ensuring that civilians in the Gaza Strip receive notifications through leaflets, through phone calls, through text messages, through humanitarian corridors, and even go as far as to tell them or to send them maps of the grid of the plan of attack. No army in the history of conflict has ever done this. This is well documented. And in fact, this has been corroborated by intelligence and military officials from around the world, who say that the army is doing whatever it can, more than any other army in history, to ensure as few civilians as casualties as humanly possible. Now, very importantly, the numbers that we get from the Gaza Strip come from the Hamas-controlled health ministry. Hamas is a terror organization. They lied at the beginning of the war when they said that Israel struck a hospital and 500 people were murdered, when we found out it was Palestinian Islamic Jihad's rocket that had fallen short, landed in the parking lot, and maybe 24 people were killed. So those numbers cannot be independently corroborated. The other thing is that Hamas make no distinction between combatants and civilians. We know that Hamas dress in civilian clothing, and that is how they fight. And we have also had testimony coming from Palestinians telling our soldiers that Hamas are not only taking the humanitarian aid that we are letting through the crossings, both Rafah and Kerem Shalom, to get to the people of Gaza who need this aid desperately, but are actually preventing them from using the humanitarian corridors. Now, all of this, I'm sure, will be entered into evidence at The Hague, at the International Court of Justice, in as much as Israel will enter our evidence what was done to us by genocidal Hamas terrorists on the 7th of October. We will also demonstrate how our army is operating within the laws of armed conflict to ensure as few civilian casualties as possible. We are at war, and the people that suffer the most in war are civilians, and nobody, we Israelis, do not want to see civilians struggle. We do not want to see civilians pay with their lives. But Hamas invited this war onto the people of Gaza and the people of Israel on the 7th of October, when they fired thousands of rockets, a war crime, because they fire from within their civilian infrastructure onto ours here in Israel. We still have rockets being fired at us in Israel. Every single one of those designed to kill us as Israelis. So if there's any party in this argument, in this conflict, that is party to the definition of genocide, whose very intent is genocide, it is Hamas. And the onus is going to be on South Africa in the next 2 days to prove the intent of genocide.
Roland Marks, to wrap it up, now, of course, we see a conflict of interests on both sides and everybody's speaking for himself. But then, in your opinion, do you see an ideal situation where a resolution of conflict will come in between Israel and Hamas maybe in the next few months thereabouts? Is there a possibility whereby there would be a peaceful coexistence among these two entities in future?
Absolutely not with Hamas. Hamas have a charter in which they call for the eradication of the state of Israel. They are a proxy of Iran, who has stated the same intention. We do not want a terrorist enclave on our borders, not for the people of Gaza, who deserve better. They deserve a chance at a life. They deserve a chance to build a state. When Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, we thought we would get Singapore or Dubai, and instead we got a terror enclave that has fired rockets for now 2 decades on Israeli civilians from within the civilian infrastructure in Gaza. We want to rid the region of a terrorist entity that holds both the Palestinian people hostage and uses them as human shields. And we can see by the use of the tunnels and the embedding of Hamas, the terror machine, in the civilian population to use against our population. So for Israel, the situation we want is a new security reality where our children can return in safety to their homes along the border with Gaza, and where the people of the Gaza Strip, the children of the Gaza Strip, have a better future than they have had under Hamas for 17 years. We want to see our neighbors flourish.
Roland Marks, thank you very much for talking to us. We appreciate that.
Only a pleasure.
UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is facing a significant rebellion from Tory members of parliament over legislation to revive his plan to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda. Over 30 backbenchers on the right of the party are backing plans to change the bill next week to make it harder for people to appeal deportation. The amendments underline the scale of Tory division over the policy, which the Prime Minister has made a priority. Ministers insist the bill allows only a vanishingly small number of appeals. Those backing the amendments include former Tory leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith and a clutch of former cabinet ministers, including former Home Secretary Suella Braverman. And I'll tell you that Zambian authorities expect to receive 1 million cholera vaccine doses from the World Health Organization amid an outbreak that has killed 249 people since last October. Roma Chilenga, the health advisor to President Hakainde Hichilema, said the doses will be deployed to the most at-risk regions and are due to arrive by Saturday. President Hichilema is expected to visit the main treatment center at the National Hero Stadium to inspect response measures. The government has delayed the reopening of schools and rolled out further preventive measures in a bid to contain the outbreak. In North Africa, Tunisia's Interior Ministry says the country and the United Nations Development Programme have agreed to strengthen bilateral cooperation in security reform. The decision was made during a meeting held between Tunisian and Interior Minister Kamel Feki and the UNDP resident representative in Tunisia, Céline Mouroud. Feki reiterated the commitment of his country to strengthening cooperation in security reform in line with the standards and provisions of international agreements and conventions. The two officials also stressed the need to adopt community policing in more Tunisian provinces to build trust between citizens and the security apparatus. The two sides also touched on ways to push further bilateral strategic partnerships, including a 2023 to 2027 local development plan agreed between Tunisia and the UNDP. Now, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has announced a new compensation for victims of a post office scandal which saw hundreds of sub-postmasters wrongly convicted of theft because of a glitch in accounting software. Ex-CEO Paula Venell said that she had listened to the growing clamor to hand back the commander of the British Empire honor given to her in 2018 and decided to hand it over. This comes after a high court in 2019 ruled that it had been computer errors, not criminality, that had been behind the missing money.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. People who worked hard to serve their communities had their lives and their reputations destroyed through absolutely no fault of their own. The victims must get justice and compensation. Today, I can announce that we will introduce new primary legislation to make sure that those convicted as a result of the Horizon scandal are swiftly exonerated and compensated.
In business, Ghana's inflation rate cooled for the 5th straight month in December, raising hopes that the central bank will consider easing monetary policy for the first time since 2021. The consumer price index rose by 23.2% last month from a year earlier after a 26.4% gain in November, government statistician Samuel Kobina Anim said in the capital, Accra, on Wednesday. The cocoa, gold and oil-producing country is facing its worst economic crisis in a generation and is in talks with bilateral and commercial creditors to restructure its debt. Meanwhile, Kenya surpassed Nigeria as Africa's top destination for startup funding in 2023, attracting $800 million compared to Nigeria's $410 million. The Big Four countries dominated funding, receiving around 75% of the total raised in 2023. During an interview on the Business Hedge show, Seun Dania, CEO of Alpha Gig Technologies, commented on how Kenya managed to secure $800 million in startup funding in 2023, and this amount was twice as much as what Nigeria, traditionally known as Africa's startup leader, was able to raise for the year.
We need to always understand that during an election year, things go south, and especially when there's a change in administration. So there's a lot of, investor, sentiments, everybody resentment. Everyone is trying to look out for, what the new administration would, bring into play to see how that can be of advantage to their investments. But on the flip side, Kenya also strategically, in the Kenya startup space, we could see a lot of diversification. So while Nigeria primarily, focused on fintech, Kenya, we saw strong growth in development in their e-commerce sector, logistics, agri-tech. Those were able to attract broader investor interests as opposed to.
And that's all at this hour. But before we go, we take a look at some of our top stories. Nigeria's Supreme Court has reserved judgment in appeals against Abia State Governor. UK Prime Minister Sunak is facing major Tory revolt over Rwanda bill. And finally, we told you that Zambia is to receive 1 million vaccine doses from World Health Organization amid cholera outbreak. You can send your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number and email on your screen. Do follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV and YouTube. Watching, I am Likon Onabanjo.